All right. Whenever we got started on the Neon, of course, Sean did the in-frame overhaul on it.
Yeah.
And he had and there wasn't really anything wrong with the in-frame overhaul per se, but when he remember when we first put it back together, there was this big old gasket that was left off. And the big old gasket that was left off was causing it to not show any vacuum, because we were checking vacuum right above the place where the EGR tube goes into the manifold, right under that place where we were checking. All the vacuum was going there instead of coming to our gauge. Well, we got that fixed, but we still had really lousy engine vacuum. Okay, and it was running really rough. But one of the things that also confused us about other vacuum leak, you could not hear that vacuum leak, and it was skipping dead on cylinders 1 and 4, but it was hitting on cylinders 2 and 3. Well, we smoke tested it, we found that vacuum leak, we got the right gasket, we put it on there. All right, it was still had really lousy vacuum. We replaced the EGR valve because the other one, when we went to take the little tube loose from it, the bolts broke off and all that kind of hogwash. So we put an EGR valve on it and got all that stuff hooked up. But the EGR valve, I noticed when I looked down there, the pipe coming from the EGR valve to the manifold was hot. And I unplugged the vacuum line from the EGR valve, and I saw that little vacuum diaphragm close. And I said, we've got vacuum lines hooked up wrong or something, because it's feeding vacuum to the EGR all the time, and it's not supposed to do that. So that took care of a lot of the rough running, and the vacuum came up to normal. But it was still skipping on cylinder number 1. All right, so now this car, we've had it around here for a long time, and the fuel rail on it is one of those little round ones that's made out of steel, But anyway, so yesterday, what we did was we got our little machine, a little box that we use that sends a half second worth of pulses to the fuel injector. You put the fuel pressure gauge on it, and you pressure up the fuel system, and you make sure it'll hold pressure. If it won't hold pressure, you can't even do this test. It does hold pressure. So, whenever you shut the engine down, it ought to be holding fuel pressure. So we shut the engine down, it was holding fuel pressure. Starting with injector number 1, 4 was the one that was misfiring, right? Starting with injector number 1, we hit the little, we let it pulse the thing 105 millisecond pulses, and that's a half a second, and it lost 20 pounds. Moved to the next one, we pressured the system back up, we let it pulse 105 millisecond pulses, it lost 20 pounds. Went to the third one, 20 pounds. Went to the fourth one, it lost 10 pounds. What does that mean?
Clogged.
Yep. And what it was, when we took it off, there was rust from the fuel rail, from the inside of the fuel rail, that had clogged the injector that's on the end. So it's a returnless fuel system. And so fuel comes in right here, this is the front of the car, goes into that fuel rail pipe, and all of the rust you got 4 injectors here, and all of the rust got washed down here to the end, or most of it did. And so the heaviest concentration of rust was in the top of this injector. Now the injector's got a little screen on top of it. But what we did was we managed to energize the injector and blow back through it with some carburetor spray and all that. We got that one cleaned out. These other ones weren't very cooperative about cleaning out, because the rust that was in it was really fine, and it was caked, and it wouldn't come out. And so I got it out of the fuel rail over there. It came out of an old Crown Vic. I don't know, the fuel pintle that drives the injector, the injector spray fuel out of on that Neon, has 4 little holes. It's got a flat plate with 4 little holes, and that makes a nice even spray, which is really a better way to do it. The old Ford injectors from that 90s model Crown Victoria are the injectors, I don't even know if they deliver the same number of pounds per hour of fuel, to tell you the truth, but they're brand new injectors. They've never had fuel through them, so they're not dirty. They came off of an engine. Whenever they would buy an engine from Ford to replace one in a car, it came with the fuel rail and the injectors and the wire harness and all that, and they would take that off and keep it in the parts room, and they had a bunch of them. They just gave me one, and that's where I got the injectors that I put in there, because they had the same size O-rings and all that. We put those in there, we fired it up, and I'm thinking those injectors aren't putting out enough juice, because it purrs like a kitten, but when it's cold, it has a tendency to act cold-natured, which means there's not enough. I don't think those injectors that I put in there are delivering as much fuel as it needs, or the pattern, the dynamics of the intake and all that, so there you go. All right, but that's what we found when we put those in there. That took care of that skip. Now, the reason it happens so dreadfully, it wasn't skipping before you took it apart, it was just smoking a little bit, see? You took the fuel rail off, and you turned it upside down, and all this rust that had been settled, that wasn't being disturbed, goes up and starts moving around in there, and then it gets washed into the injectors, you see what I'm saying? So this wasn't anything you did wrong, it was just a byproduct of what happened. And when that rust can come out of the, like some farmers' on-site farm fuel tank, and they just get a big steel tank and start using it to put gas in, and they don't filter the gas coming out of it a lot of the time. And that rust can be so fine that it can go through a fuel filter and clog the fuel injector. Seen that before. I used to have a little shop tip posted out here. It can clog up the fuel pressure regulator because it's got a little tiny screen in that. But that rust can be such tiny little particles that can get through the fuel filter and cause trouble in the fuel system. And when all of those fuel injectors are loaded with rust, it's really difficult to get the rust out of them. I mean, you can sometimes get enough of it out where it'll sort of make a difference, but it's never going to be like it was when it was new until you put new fuel injectors in it, or replacement ones. And so that's the reason that the only one that we reused was the one that we were able to get all the rust out of.
Since some vehicles, these fuel rails that rust internally like that, do they ever put out TSBs or anything for stuff like that?
Well, I'm sure somewhere there's some TSBs, I don't know. But really, they started making most of the fuel rails later on out of stainless steel and all that. But on those returnless fuel systems, you're going to have weird problems. I had a Dodge van one time that was skipping on the front cylinder on the left bank, which is number 1 on that one. And it had a returnless fuel system. The engine sitting in here like this. Well, everything was like it was supposed to be, except the fuel pump was cavitating, pushing air to the fuel rail. And that air was bubbling up to the top of the highest part on that fuel rail, which is where the number 1 cylinder was. And there was an air bubble right there at the dadgum fuel injector. And it took a lot of doing to get that figured out. You know, because it kept skipping on number 1, and you can't see that stuff. You know, if the fuel rail was made out of glass or something like this, you know, you could see it. But I couldn't see no air in there. But it took me a while to figure that one out. That was a booger bear. And the one that you had, see, down at the end was the one that got most of the rust, you see. And so there's issues with that. Anyway, that fuel rail came out of it dumped its rust. All right, now I'm probably going to have to swap batteries in the middle of this talk. But let's go to engine repair 2. Yeah, this is 1517. You see that? Actually, that's 1516. Or is it 1517? Whatever. Let me see how far I went with that. I think I numbered that test wrong, but it's 1516. Yeah. This is it's actually a 4-page test. So I put 1516 here, but I think it's 1517. All right, let me go on in here and jump through this thing right quick, because like I say, our camera's going to go cut it down on us. All right. Excuse me, that's engine repair test, not engine performance test. That was dumb. This is 21 to 23. I shuffled my tests around, I went to the wrong place. 21 to 23. Engine repair test 21 to 23. Okay, let's go and talk about chrome-coated rings. They can last 75% longer than plain cast iron rings. That is false. That is false. The harmonic balancer is used to absorb the torsional vibrations created by the camshaft as the engine speeds up and slows down. That's false. The balancer is on the end of the crankshaft, not the camshaft. That's that heavy-looking iron piece that the crank pulley bolts to. And it's got rubber. It's got an inner piece and an outer piece with rubber in between them. And sometimes that rubber will turn loose and it'll start to slip. Number 3, the crosshatch pattern in a cylinder that you put in there with your cylinder hone should be at an angle of 20 to 40 degrees off the horizontal plane of the deck. That is right. You remember when I was telling you guys when you were honing those cylinders, when you were doing them in-frame overhauls, to move that hone up and down, spin it slow and move it up and down really fast because you're wanting about a 40-degree crosshatch, right? All right. All engine blocks can be bored 60 thousandths. No, they can't. There are some of them, if you bore them 60 thousandths, you'll go into the water jacket because the walls are too thin. You'll need to be an engine repair test 2123. That's the one that we got here. I was really fouled up on that. Engine repair test 21-23. 21 to 23. This book had a lot of chapters in it, and I had to go fast. When installing pistons in an engine, you check the front markings before installation. That piston is going to have a mark that says, this one here has got an F on it. You see that F right there? That F right there is really important. And also, a lot of times they'll have a notch. Sometimes they'll have a little arrow here, and some of the marks is really hard to see. Some of them won't have anything you can really identify on them, and that's kind of annoying when they make them that way. But if you pay attention to the way that they were in there when they take them out, by looking at where the tang is on the rod bearing, then you'll be able to tell that way. Number 6, the installation of core plugs, which is your freeze plug, we call it, but the core plug is basically something, what they call them, the right name for them is a core plug. They require a non-hardening sealant, and that is false. Technician A says cylinder liners that are cast in place are called wet liners. He's not right. Technician B says cylinder liners that are replaceable are called wet sleeves. What do you mean by cylinder liner? The cylinder that the piston travels up and down through is actually a separate piece of metal that you can pull out of the block, and it's in there with O-rings. And there's some engines that are built that way. Renaults used to be built that way. Them old little four-cylinder Renaults used to be built that way, and it's pretty cool because you get to replace the doggone cylinder wall. You always got a round hole. You don't have to worry about it being egg-shaped or nothing like that when you're building it. All right, number 8. Piston skirt clearances can be as little as 5/10,000ths of an inch. That's 0.0005. 5/10,000ths of an inch. And what's that? Is that half a thousand?
Yeah.
That's not very much, is it? All right, number 9. Aluminum blocks can be checked for cracks by, you can't magnaflux an aluminum block. You know what magnaflux is? Whenever you sprinkle this stuff on there that'll be sensitive to the magnetism, hit it with a magnet, and the crack will attract the filings or whatever you put on there, and that's a magnafluxing thing. But you have to basically use some other stuff, dye penetrant on the aluminum. Technician A says the technician can gauge the degree of cylinder wear by the depth of the ring ridge. Well, ring ridges are something we talk about a lot that are practically non-existent anymore. Unless you're working on old 350s and 302s, you're probably still going to see them. But that's number 10 is actually going to be A. They like that. They like to talk about the ring ridge, because everybody that's done engines for a long time, and the woman that wrote this book has been a mechanic for a long time. And so kind of like I did, she started on the old V8s, back in the 70s and probably whatever. And she likes to talk about the ring ridge, but the ring ridge is just about a non-issue anymore, with all due respect to everybody involved, unless you're working on old engines. Technician A says that to measure cylinder taper, the technician should use a dial bore gauge and measure from the bottom of ring travel to the top of ring travel. That is really a good gauge to use. It's kind of expensive. It's got 3 little on one side and one on the other, that actually whenever they measure the bore, the dial tells you. And I know that Pilcher over there, he loves to use those things. He doesn't use anything but a dial bore gauge because it's really fast and it's accurate and that kind of stuff. Number 11 is actually going to be A. He's right about that. He's the only one that's right. Technician A says main bearing clearances are typically 8/10,000ths to 3/1000ths. Technician B says crankshaft end play is typically 2/1000ths to 4/1000ths. Who is right about that? That's number 12. That's B. B.
Hey, Mr. Richard.
Yeah.
Wes had a blowout, so he still builds a few more minutes.
He has more blowouts than anybody I've ever seen in my life. And he's also got more cars than anybody else I know.
He bought some more the other day.
Bought more cars, okay.
He bought a 3000 GT and a
that's that Mitsubishi thing, like a Dodge Stealth. Yeah. Yeah, one of the other guys, Eric Dunn, that guy, he bought one of those. He bought one that somebody had partially took apart, paid $500 for it. It was a 94 model, and he put it back together in here and put a timing belt on it. We pulled the heads, did valves and all that. He earned his money on that job. But he got it running, and it ran good. He drove it for a long time. I don't know if he still got it or not. Okay, number 12. Let's see. Number 13. Technician A says excessive ringside clearance will cause blow-by and oil consumption. That's right. Actually, a main bearing clearance, as it says on that previous question, said 8/10 thousandths to 3 thousandths, or usually they're supposed to be about a thousandth of an inch. Is all, you know. I mean, that's what I like to see them. You know, if they're 1.5 thousandths, that's almost too much. You know, 2 thousandths of an inch, and you can check them with plastic gauge. And anyway, technician A says excessive ringside clearance will cause blow-by and oil consumption. Technician B says excessive ringside clearance can be caused by installing the wrong rings. Side clearance is what? What's side clearance? Remember?
That's where you take that feeler gauge.
Take a feeler gauge and put it between the ring and the land. See how much the ring's gonna move this way. You're not gonna have any on these new pistons that I've got, like I said, I got here. But on an old piston, if they, you know, think about it. These things are jerking up and down all the time. They're gonna wear out those lands and all that. And so if you check them, most of the people that are serious engine rebuilders don't usually rebuild an engine unless they get it bored 30 over and put new pistons in it anyway. That's typically the way that works. You know, so. I mean, it costs money. It costs a lot of money. Matter of fact, I know one guy that's got a shop over there in Enterprise, and he does really high quality work. And every single engine that he builds for somebody, he balances it. And when you balance it, you make all the pistons weigh exactly the same. And you know, every one of these parts of that will weigh the same. And it greatly reduces the amount of hammering that the engine has to do. It runs smoother, lasts longer. It's really good to balance it. Now, you're going to pay through the nose, but the finished product's going to be better.
You hear it in the exhaust sound too, won't you?
Huh?
It'll sound a lot smoother, won't it?
Everything will be smoother. I mean, it won't vibrate as much anyway. You're just going to be a smooth running vehicle there. Some high-performance engines with forced induction systems use forged aluminum pistons. That's the answer to that one. And then 15, the purpose of piston pin offset is to reduce the amount of piston slap. Now, piston pin offset is what will cause an engine to knock if you put the pistons in backwards. Put them in backwards, you'll hear a knocking sound. And I told some of you guys how I built a Volkswagen bug engine one time. I'd been used to working on American stuff, and my dad was a Volkswagen guy. And we put that motor together, and it cranked and ran, but it started making this knocking noise. And it had lots of power. It jerked front wheels off around with that dune buggy. I mean, just it'd pop a wheelie. And I called my dad, and I said, what did that Samuel I do wrong? This motor's knocking. He said, which way do you point the arrows on top of the pistons? You're supposed to point it toward the flywheel. I said, doggone it. I was used to working on American cars and pointing it toward where the belts are. You know, it's backwards. The front of a bug engine is where the flywheel is because it's in the back. You know, the old bug. He says, now if you can put up with that knocking until it comes apart, you'll outrun the tar out of anybody that's got one put together right. Because that thing's got a lot of power when you put them together that way. And that one did. Boy, it snatched wheels off around. And when we put it together the right way, pulled it back apart, turned the pistons around, put it back in the right way, it was just as quiet as everyone see, but it didn't have near as much power. I mean, it had power, but not, you know, it was normal. That's funny to me, though, and that's kind of...
Why would it have more power backwards?
Huh?
Why would it have more power backwards?
Well, Daddy said he didn't know why. But, I mean, I'm sure some, you know, gearhead engineer will tell you. I mean, I don't know. I just know that putting them in there backwards makes it'll knock like a son of a gun if you put them in there backwards. I mean, it's terrible. The piston pin offset, you know. But anyways, deck flatness should be checked with what? A straight edge. We got there's a straight edge right over there. See that straight edge? That's made for checking deck. I mean, and this is made for them big 6-cylinder engines. It's got long, you know. We got a little short one that I use in here for 4-cylinders, and that's what we use to check that Honda head, which should be ready sometime today, by the way. I don't know, you know, Stokes can be here to put it together. All right, rod bearings will wear more on which halves? Think about it. The firing is hitting this, so it's going to wear more on the upper half, right? You're going to beat that one. The main bearings wear more on the bottom half because the weight of the crankshaft is pushing. You can see just the natural way things work. Got enough clearance, you know. Okay, so number 18, to install piston rings, you're supposed to use a ring expander. That is the right way to do it, but in all of the years that I worked on engines and did stuff like that, I don't know if I ever saw anybody use one in any shop I ever worked at. Just about everybody put them on with their hands and with their fingers, you know, and I mean, it doesn't typically cause a lot of trouble. But, you know, if you get too rough with it, you can bend rings and cause issues and all that kind of stuff. To determine oil clearance, the technician should compare the squished plastic gauge to the paper scale. Plastic gauge is a little waxy piece of string that you lay on the crank journal. Y'all done it, where you tie that thing up and you see how much it squishes out. It's a perfect size. And then on the little paper sleeve that it came in, it's got little different widths. If it didn't squeeze it very much, it's 3/1000 on the green plastic gauge. If it squeezes a little more, it's 2, and then finally, if it squeezes it a lot, it's 1. And so if you go down there and measure that, you'll know that is the absolute most accurate way to measure bearing clearance on a motor that you're building. You can mic that sucker till you're blue in the face, but when you plastic gauge it, you got the gut numbers. You got it right there. And this machine shop guy that I had to know told me that he had to go to one of the local dealerships and teach the mechanics how to plastic gauge. And these are people working in a dealership. And I ain't gonna say which dealership it is, but the fact is, the fact that you got mechanics working in a dealership doing engine work that don't know how to use plastic gauge is silly. That is downright stupid. You know, I teach all that in here, you know. But anyway, let's move on. Number 20, insufficient rod side clearance. Rod side clearance. Rod side clearance meaning how much it can move. Here, see here? How much it can move that way. Improperly installed rods if you got too much side clearance. Okay, that finishes up that particular test.